Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. This week has been a little dry when it comes to Apple News, so I took a little bit of a shorter break just to make sure that we have a lot more to talk about than just one topic per video. So we have two or three. There is obviously more and more M4 reviewing and benchmarking happening. There's a lot going outside of the Apple community now. People like Linus Tech Tips might not have reviewed the devices yet, but have given some of their opinions. People like MaxTag have aggregated some of that, so thanks very much to them. Relay joining the chat, saying hello back. Angelica saying she missed me. That's very, very nice. Yeah, so right after work, to freshen up, here I am, and we are going to talk about quite a few interesting things today. Maybe not quite the super duper pro ultra devices we usually focus on, but quite a bit of the broader Apple strategy. Mark Gurman spoke a little bit about next gen Siri, because don't forget, we are technically overdue a new Siri coming sometime next year, whether it's with iOS 18.3 or 18.4. We are getting a Siri that is smarter in general, and a Siri that has much deeper control of iOS. But now Mark Gurman is promising an even smarter Siri, which he calls LLM Siri, and I do have I do have a couple of comments on that. I do understand what he means, though the way he phrases it really made people go apeshit in trying to downplay what Apple is doing with Apple Intelligence this and early next year, and basically throughout 2025. If the assumption is that, true Siri, like true ChatGPT comparison Siri, is only coming in 2026. So I will try to fix some misconceptions here about this LLM Siri, and we'll see whether it's reasonable to be disappointed, to get excited about, to be somewhat neutral. At least that's my intention here. Then there are smaller products. We are expecting things like AirTags 2, because let's not forget, things get upgraded. Even things that feel like very like one functional, right? They have one chip inside, they do one thing in software, right? But over time, Apple updates that one chip a little bit, right? And they do want to sell new products, and they do want to have new marketing and more advertisement for a product, and that works best for a new product rather than the old one. So even though most of you are probably pretty happy with your AirTags, I know I am with mine, we will be getting supposedly next year a second generation. Next is iPhone SE 4. That one is actually pretty self-explanatory. We talked quite a lot in the past about what this iPhone is going to be like. More recent rumors are now doubling down on the fact that it will have an Apple-designed 5G modem. I will give my expectations and my predictions on what I expect that modem to focus on. And I would put that into context. I apologize if I just blinded you by switching from a dark mode to a white mode website, but yet, unfortunately, dark mode support across the web. Wait, if I click that, why isn't that automatic? Like every other website does it automatically. Well, maybe Apple News Focus website just integrate better with WebKit. Yeah, but that's a disappointment. I apologize for blinding you. So I would put the iPhone SE 4 into context with previous rumors about Apple's modems. Don't forget, supposedly 2025 will not just be the start of Apple's 5G modems that we'll see in the iPhone SE 4, but also Apple's own Wi-Fi modems, which we are supposedly going to get across the new iPads. Again, still a little iffy on which iPads at which price point, depending on what exactly that modem achieves. And even on some of the iPhone 17 series, though that rumor was a little bit new. We covered it in a previous video. I don't know if we are even talking about the same modem, because I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, Apple builds like an A18 chip and an A18 Pro chip, and then they basically like differentiate them by one by one GPU core and by like a better USB-C controller and stuff like that. So I wouldn't put it past Apple to design 2 or 3 Wi-Fi and 5G models depending on what they want the device to be doing. Honey Tana saying, "Hi Mark, where are you from, by the way?" Well, I am streaming from Germany, Berlin. Originally, I am coming from a country named Moldova in Eastern Europe, if anyone is interested. So let's start with the least important rumor here, and that is AirTag 2 coming next year. This is coming from Bloomberg's Mark Gurman. Again, we can argue if Mark Gurman might be a little bit too bold these days, and sometimes he just shares news and rumors without really any details. He will say shit like, "Oh, device coming next year has a new chip," right? But it's like, yeah, I mean, except for knowing the year, which I guess is good on him, right? It's like, yeah, we all would have predicted that AirTags would have gotten a new chip. Some expected that maybe it would get like a credit card AirTag, but given that I doubt that Apple is putting a lot of engineering effort into creating like so many different designs, especially now that they opened up the Find My network a little bit, now that they're cooperating with Google, I think they're very happy to leave like the crazy designs to other manufacturers. They will focus on this more simple, round design with the very easy to switch batteries, making it a surprisingly environmentally friendly product as well. So yeah, I don't think that we'll see like 20 different AirTag designs anytime soon. So according to Bloomberg's Mark Gurman, it's coming in the middle of next year. Design will stay pretty similar, but will improve on the original in 3 key ways. Now, this is an interesting way to put it, because the 3 key ways being described here are actually have nothing to do with the design. So those are things that are just better. So yeah, I really couldn't tell you. So apparently that code name is BP89. It's progressing in manufacturing test, blah blah blah. Basically it's in pre-production, I guess. And supposedly the 3 improvements being focused on right now here is better range. Sure, AirTag have pretty good range, but I assume with a new U-series processor, Apple's devices are kind of unique in the industry, that even their cheaper devices have U-series ultra-wideband chips. So it would make sense. Also, Apple's current U-series chips are a little bit old, so if they have a new one with wider range and higher efficiency, stuff like that, why not? An improved wireless chip, which I assume would be partially enabling that. Maybe there's also like a slightly better antenna. Obviously, there's also Bluetooth. So whatever it's combined here, maybe it's getting even more custom. Like we know that Apple is building its own modems that combining Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So and they have already been making custom ultra wideband chips, so maybe this custom chip would be also very custom for Bluetooth as well. And improved privacy, whether or not that has more to do with on-device processing, or it basically overcomes like things, for example, when people use them for stalking, they will sometimes manually disable the speakers. I assume Apple could maybe get the device to not work if the speaker isn't working, which I know some people could complain about, but I think that would be a worthwhile improvement. And I assume most other improvements for anti-stalking prevention and things like that, personal privacy, would primarily come through software. However, it's good to see that Apple will be focusing on privacy. Gurman makes reference to the fact that a number of people have used the device for stalking. It should be noted, we have seen significantly less reports than I think many people expected. I think that with how many software like bottlenecks they are to stalking, not that it's not doable. I think a lot of people are probably afraid of using an AirTag. In fact, you are probably better off just using any other product than an AirTag, because it is more likely to be discovered. It is visually recognizable. So yeah, while I'm not saying that it's stalking proof, I think that the earlier reports that we have seen were also a lot of like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, basically, right? The police weren't sure how it was going to be used. The people weren't sure of how it's going to be used. I fully understand that like women protection groups and stuff like that and pro privacy groups were concerned. But ultimately, I am kind of in, like, I know it sounds a little bit Apple sheepish, but I have grown to trust Apple on privacy issues. Not that I believe that they are perfect, but I believe they're basically as good as a big tech company can get in that regard. Apple still wants some data across like your iOS usage habits, your App Store buys, and whatever. But with AirTags, Apple doesn't really gain anything from like blatantly stealing your data. And enabling like privacy compromises is also not in their interest. So I know that whenever they launch such a product, they don't want the bad PR that would come from making this product poorly thought out. And the better thought out it is, obviously, the easier it deals with those issues. Again, some things can and should still be improved. Apple's cooperation with Google in that regard is very encouraging, but it's happening rather slowly, unfortunately. So, yeah, still some stuff to work on, but I believe for a first-gen product, AirTag 1 delivered pretty well. And I definitely do believe that AirTags 2 will be quite successful with a few improvements on those core issues. I almost forgot, like, the price of AirTag, right? It's $29, I believe. And then I believe you can get where would it be? AirTag. Jesus Christ, that's a weird way to put them on the website. Yeah, it's $30, 29. It's not even $29.99. It's just $29 for one and $100 for a 4-pack. I wonder if they would slightly increase the prices here, because there will be a lot of AirTag 1s running around, right? It will be pretty easy to get those at around $20, maybe even $18 or something like that. In the 4-pack, you can probably bring it down to maybe half the price per one unit. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the new ones are like $34, right? Nothing crazy. I think $39 would become not prohibitively expensive, but I think it would cross important thresholds in the minds of people on pricing. And Apple could just literally say, you know what, there are millions of AirTags out there that you can buy from other stores and stuff like that. And by the time these are sold out, AirTags 2 will be probably available through Amazon and stuff like that at similar prices. I know that because in Germany, like by the time I bought my second 4-pack, I got it like reduced in price by like 15%, and I assume that will be the case for many people buying. Those are willing to wait, save a few dollars. So, well, again, it's not the most exciting Apple product. It is something that we should be expecting next year. There's a lot of stuff that is now lining up very much for like a, I don't know, like a March or April Apple event, or maybe something like this could be more of not even like a WWDC announcement, but like just around WWDC, Apple could maybe launch like a newsroom report, and then during DubDub they would have like maybe a privacy focused, like basically like a TED talk with developers and talk about changes to the Find My network and how you integrate third-party products with it. So there's a lot that I could see happen here. None of the things super big, but definitely like worth to keep your eye on. Now, the thing that definitely Speaking of Bloomberg smart Gurman, that he dropped that was much more contentious is that Apple is working on a smarter version of Siri. Now, I am using here 95 Mac rumors as per usual. Not only does the Bloomberg website remain an absolute nightmare for me, not always knowing what is free, what is not, and definitely not willing to pay money for it, but even more importantly, Mark Gurman actually writes this little, unfortunately. Like found a way to read this report fully. There wasn't much more information here than that. This is why I'm very confident in using here 95 Mac rumors. I know this is basically hearsay in a way, but yeah, I promise you, you don't get much more from the official report. So Apple is designing the more capable Siri to better compete with chatbots. Now, this is important because he says that it plans to use advanced large language models. That will already happen with iOS 18.3, 18.4, whenever that new Siri drops that has deeper control of iOS. The entire point of all of Apple Intelligence is the use of large language models. Now, granted, Apple has used LLMs even before, but I understand that there might be a difference if you call something an advanced large language model or more of a basic large language model, like what they used in the past for offline voice dictation and stuff like that inside Siri. Not saying that there isn't a difference, and he definitely didn't just say, oh, it's Apple's first use of large language models. But it is quite important that either Mark Gurman doesn't fully get it, or he just was very, very dismissive in the way he wrote it, and wrote it in such a basic way that anybody who actually fully understands the topic, not even saying I fully understand the topic, but anybody who more understands the topic was a little bit like, huh? Is this like a delay of the Siri that we were promised by a full year even? But no, apparently not. So what is promised here is that the chatbot version of Siri would be able to hold ongoing conversations, much like ChatGPT. Now, it's important to note Apple will have conversational Siri with 18.3, 18.4, whenever that Siri is coming. They've already talked about it. And they promised it for that release. However, it's not going to be accessing any like additional information beyond like system functions, your messages, your calendars, your contacts, your reminders, your photos, your Safari history, your bookmarks. So all the things you do on iOS, that it will be able to leverage. But if you ask it general knowledge tasks that go beyond like what's the highest mountain or shit like that, and you ask it instead like, well, math tasks it can actually do. But like, let's say you ask it to like generate a story for you, like the way that ChatGPT can give you create music and create I don't know, fairy tales or whatever bullshit. Oh, and of course scientific work apparently, and university stuff and writings and whatever else. I assume that would go into that direction. I don't know if it would be fully functional in that regard. Maybe Apple just partners with like Google for just the search data behind it that feeds it. But then ultimately the output is then like reworked through an Apple LLM. It should be noted though that this kind of LLM does not really run on device. You can, but you really wouldn't want it. For one, you already need internet access to get data anyway, right? Especially if you ask it anything like summarize this historic event for me or something like that, right? And then you ask it a follow-up, which is like part of the ongoing conversations feature, right? It's like, and now do it in for this event, or just make a comparison to this event, right? For one, it already needs to access the internet to even know about those events fully, right? And then, of course, the actual large language model working on that is pretty advanced. It needs to understand complicated text. It needs to work with a lot of data in parallel, unless you always wanted to just use Wikipedia or something like that. It needs to be able to compare data points on the internet. So to understand, oh, most are saying this, so that one is probably closer to the truth than this one website that says something entirely different. So that data can probably be discarded, or maybe just use as a footnote of like uh, this is some sources say, right, like a reference like that. Diplomaster is saying that's so 2000 and late, mate. It rhymed, but the point is that nobody wants that from Apple. Like, this is the point. I feel like some engineers at Apple wants to create a chat GPT like competitor, because, well, they feel maybe like irked on as engineers and they see some competitive side to it. But the entire point is that what Apple is doing right now with Apple Intelligence, the focus of on-device processing, the focus on private cloud compute that is both energy efficient, privacy focused, is still very much closely integrated to your Apple data. So it does all the Apple things you would expect. That's the things I always wanted Apple to do. For all the other stuff, I can ask ChatGPT. I know that Apple will simply never invest into the ecosystem or the infrastructure, the server space, the gigantic energy consumption associated with that ChatGPT, Microsoft, Google are doing, even Nvidia to a degree, of course, Facebook and Meta, right? I can ask 4 or 5 huge large language models, 2 or 3 of them very proprietary, 2 or 3 of them very open, right? And I can compare those results, and some will be like, well, why shouldn't Apple do it? Well, why didn't Apple do a search engine? Why didn't Apple do a Twitter competitor? Why didn't Apple do a YouTube competitor? Why, like, why, right? And the entire point is that Apple has limited resources, not in terms of money, but in terms of manpower, and overseeing everything from like gigantic servers to like actually making sure that it's somewhat profitable to run any of that shit is really, really complicated. Unless you're saying like Apple would want at some point to monetize this, then I could see it. I could see basically private cloud compute becoming the cheaper version, and then this knowledge cloud compute would be more of like Apple's, like, I don't know, pay like us $9.99 a month, $4.99. I wouldn't even know what they would price it at. It would probably depend a lot on the actual like quality of it. They could integrate it, I guess, with like Apple One across the board. Maybe even like buying like a 50 gigabytes of iCloud would give you a few like search queries per day or something like that. But now the question is also, how does that compare, or how does that clash with Apple's other goals, like their pro-environmental goals, and the fact that they promise that private cloud compute will be energy neutral because it's built on renewable energy, and they're reinvesting some energy into communities, and they're buying like carbon credits and shit like that, right? That's all cool. What happens when they build an actual chat GPT comparison? Will they build nuclear factories around those servers at that point? Because that's what you would need to keep it like carbon neutral. Tippermaster, I do think people will want it for the integration. Well, they will be integrating ChatGPT, and will be integrating other solutions. And don't forget that it's not just ChatGPT at this point. The latest version of Google Gemini is apparently really, really good. It's breaking a few benchmarks. Claude is coming up with a new version every couple of months and stuff like that. And all of those models could be integrated into Siri. Like, Siri will house other large language models the same way Safari houses houses search engines. That's what I think will be happening. Siri being in this conversation class would open up AI to tens of millions of more people at least. The problem is there is a problem with the narrative of democratizing something, right? Like when you're saying, oh, it opens up stuff to something. ChatGPT is free. The basic version, ChatGPT 4.0, while it has seen some downgrades to make the better model look artificially better, um, Gemini is free, and they even, I believe, like changed their monetization model for like Gemini Plus or Pro, whatever, because people simply weren't buying it, so they just bundled it with their Google One Cloud offerings, right? So my question is in that regard, and then of course you have all those open models. My question is, at what point is it just too much? At what point would Apple be doing the exact same thing as somebody else and basically wasting their oxygen on it in comparison to doing something different and focusing more on, like, look, Siri does all your on-device stuff. Siri has a little bit of knowledge, and Siri now, with this version, gets the ability to analyze some of that knowledge. Maybe in a very basic way, like Wikipedia, like obviously summarization tools are already coming to Safari. Rewriting tools are coming already to Apple Intelligence. So I'm not saying that some of this stuff shouldn't be coming to the other devices, but yeah, I know it's not a bad counter. You're saying Linux is free, and doesn't mean that Linux is as easily available as Windows or Mac OS. I fully understand that. But the point is, if Linux was integrated into iOS in a way, that would already be the thing, right? I'm not saying Siri being smarter absolutely opens up the world of LLMs and more advanced AI to more people. Absolutely true. But the most advanced thing, or even more correctly speaking, the most chatbot-y things, I think that those could work simply by Siri by default integrating at least one LLM like ChatGPT, and then for others using something like Google Gemini and Claude, whatever, right? So I'm not saying that Apple should prohibit you from using it. I'm not saying Apple should prevent you from integrating those things into the OS. And I understand that over time, Apple will do a lot of those things on device or in private cloud compute. But when people are saying, oh, we need Siri to do everything that ChatGPT does, that I honestly disagree with. By the way, some people have broken Siri's LLM basically inside the latest betas, and it can do the shit that ChatGPT does. It can write you a story. It can summarize some data for you or whatever. But the point is that Apple prohibits it from doing that, for one, because on device that's running pretty poorly, they don't yet have the private cloud compute infrastructure to enable it. And if they did, it would become questionable how much they could actually supply with renewable energy, at least if they build it up really, really fast. And before that happens, I'm honestly not sure if Apple would do that, because it would come with an enormous investments in money. It would come with a very, very questionable change to Apple's environmental policies potentially, all while other companies are already providing the same thing. That's just my opinion. Let's see what else is the context of all of this happening. While we're discussing this, guys, thank you so much for joining. Please, I hope you have noticed a small change. I put like MarkTech Live in brackets next to the main name of the channel. I hope more people are able to actually understand what this channel is. I have seen some people saying in the past, like, oh, I found your channel, and it was basically just like your latest video is like 3, 4, 5 months old. What's up with that? And then I went to like into the live section and saw, oh, it's actually a live stream channel, because apparently nobody reads the description of the channel. So hopefully with live that helps. Of course, if you're watching this, you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Like the video, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. I love interacting with the live comments. Of course, if you want to support this channel directly, you can do so via super chats or stickers right while I'm live, or you can become a channel member right here on YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon. However you choose to do the work to support this channel, that's up to you. All of it is very much appreciated, whether you agree with me or disagree with me. me, want to have a heated debate, again, I will be opening up this channel to new ways of interacting with stuff like Discord calls and things like that. But as you can see, my schedule has been pretty busy. So I usually try to make the streams actually worthwhile. Not going to be streaming for 8 hours when there are no like actual Apple news to talk about. So whenever you can join, however you can support, it's all very much appreciated. Thank you guys. So a chatbot version would be able to hold ongoing conversations, so much like ChatGPT. Apple wants customers to be able to better converse with the personal assistant, with Siri responding more like a human. The use of LLMs will also allow Siri to perform much more complex tasks, which Apple has to rely on OpenAI's ChatGPT for in iOS 18.2. Apple is working on improving what Siri can do in and between apps with Apple Intelligence in iOS 18, and that will lay some of the groundwork for the updated version of Siri. So that's very important. Like, we are still getting a better, newer Siri in some newer version of iOS 18 and early to mid 2025. It's then that iOS 19 and maybe not iOS 19.1 or 19.2, but more like iOS 19.3 or 19.4 would then about a year later introduce an even more upgraded Siri. So if you think like of the iOS 18.3 or 4 Siri as basically like Siri 2.0 or whatever, this would be more like Siri 3.0. And for one, I am very excited about those changes if hopefully more of them are on device based. There's also the question, of course, if there is any potential for exclusivity here. Maybe Apple could say, because we are running Siri on device, and look, iPhone 17 Pro has like 12 gigs of RAM and the fastest chip we ever put into an iPhone. Here it is, and maybe it needs an M3 neural engine or newer, or that point maybe like M4, something like that. Together with like the GPU on the large SoC. So that would be all very interesting, especially for M4, because M4 Apple could potentially say like, oh, we actually optimize it for more memory. The iPhone has 12 now. M4 devices have 16 or more, except for the iPad Pro somehow. That was such a bad decision on Apple's part, by the way, to not give the iPad Pro at least 12 gigs of RAM for its base configuration. I think that will just unnecessarily hold it back. I think Apple expects 8 gigs of RAM, especially with like the ability for memory swap, to basically be good enough for like almost the next decade. But I think they will hit certain limitations. And I think they have started predicting that. And that's why the upgrade for M4 memory was not to 12 gigabytes of memory, as I have predicted in the past over and over again, but actually right to 16. So that's very interesting. So for that functionality, Apple will use a first generation Apple LLM. That I don't understand, because Apple has had LLMs for a while. And so no idea. Maybe they're using like, maybe he's using the term first gen wrong. Maybe he's more about saying it's like a first responder LLM, right? Because he's saying it will evaluate requests to determine whether the existing Siri infrastructure should be used, or if a second LLM that's able to handle much more complex tasks should be queried. I assume some of that would probably then rely on a newer version of private cloud compute. Right now, private cloud compute is based on M2 Ultra chips. And I assume maybe M2 Max and whatever. Supposedly M4 chips will become part of private cloud compute starting sometime next year. So if we assume that like we get M4 Ultra, Mac Studio, and Mac Pro sometime in the second half of next year, then maybe the entire idea of all of this is that by somewhere March or April of 2026, Apple would have enough M4 Ultras to significantly build out their private cloud compute infrastructure, and that would then work on like for a newer version of Siri. Again, purely speculative, cannot tell you if any of this is correct, but I assume that if it's actually a chat GPT comparison, it has to be strongly internet based. And so Apple would essentially have an offline LLM, maybe even one that works with the internet, right? But with very basic data points. But for everything where it has to actually scour the internet for more detailed data, that is when the second LLM with much better analysis capabilities comes into place. Recently, a lot of smaller LLMs have been able to replicate a lot of the results of larger large language models. So basically, you can reduce like the size of an LLM by 10x, but the results will still be half as good, right? So it's 5 times more efficient, you could say. Not quite, but basically in the ballpark, right? So maybe Apple is just targeting that point where they will have so much on-device processing power. I assume at that point nobody will complain that like, oh, the A16 chip cannot run Apple Intelligence, or maybe they will also just cut off the A17 chip, or even the A18. Who knows? And then for everything else, Apple will just say, you know what? We still need cloud. We have always been a cloud company. I mean, we built iCloud. We provide services like Maps, iMessage, and obviously we do house stuff like Apple TV Plus and music and all that jazz. So it's not like we're building like our first ever servers for this. But yeah, Apple would at least have to explain the privacy considerations of that and the environmental aspect, at least to me. Apple is testing the new Siri in a separate app on iPhones, iPads, and Macs, but it will eventually replace the current version of Siri. Yeah, that makes sense. For testing, that it would be separated into an extra app. Yeah. The Siri update could be announced as soon as 2025, likely as part of WWDC. And the introduction of iOS 19. While Siri will be previewed early, Apple does not intend to launch the update until several months after it is unveiled. There is a question here if we could get like potentially a very early beta here. Especially for the offline functionality of that Siri. But knowing that how betas are treated, unfortunately, where people will look at betas and just make assumptions of that beta issues will persist in the actual OS, or they will harp on like, oh my god, this beta caused stability issues. And it's like, yeah, if you're not capable of a basic restore, you probably shouldn't be running a beta anyway. So and sometimes betas do more, to be honest, but yeah, usually beta issues are quite typical for beta issues. And when I see like wider audiences complaining that like, oh my god, this beta introduced that or that problem, and I'm like, yes, it's a beta. That's the entire point. Problems come up, problems are eliminated until some point it's ready for a release candidate, and at some point it's ready for official release. As of now, Apple is aiming for a spring 2026 launch date, but Apple's plans could change. I think he also probably isn't quite sure here, so there might be potential that it could be like a late 2025 launch. At that point, I would pretty much guarantee that it's announced at DubDub. If it might be coming like very mid 2026, which would obviously be at like what, iOS 19.5 or 6, then I would see it being honestly like announced maybe during a spring event of 2026, because it would just be a 9-month wait for yet another new Siri. I think would be received pretty negatively. Like, I think that in my opinion, that absolutely works for the first generation of Apple Intelligence. Apple has plenty to launch in 18.1, 18.2, and stuff like that. But if they do the same thing with iOS 19, not the not the divided launches, right, between 19.1, 19.2. I still expect that to happen. But if they announce, like, oh, here's yet another new Siri, wait another 9 months for it, I think people would be a little pissed at that. Let me know if I'm crazy here or something like that, because this is where I would actually agree. I think that people would just start saying, you know what, why even talk about it? ChatGPT exists, it's already integrated. Google Gemini just got third-party integration with your new developer tools for Apple Intelligence. Some like regulatory agencies are forcing you to integrate other solutions anyway. So if you cannot just deliver, then maybe shut up about it until you actually can, right? Yeah, so that is about how I take this rumor. I'm not saying it's wrong. Obviously, Mark Gurman has been right on quite a few Apple Intelligence factoids over the last couple of months and even years. But that being said, describing it as like an LLM Siri, even an advanced LLM Siri, is a little bit misleading, because that sounds like it's like the first Siri to be built on LLMs, and that's simply not the case. Nicholas Klimchuk saying, few need Siri. Chat, yes, some functions using LLM also fine. I don't know anybody who talks with Siri. Exactly, and people always try to make the point, well, of course people aren't talking with Siri. Siri is dumb, right? But that's not the case. I talk with my HomePod in the exact way that I want. And that's pretty much the exact way that Apple made it work. Well, you're saying Siri is to die like Cortana. Siri is getting upgraded. First in iOS 18.3 or 4, and then in 2026. You're asking basically for a rebrand. Because Apple will always have a voice assistant on their devices. And don't forget, Siri is not just a voice assistant. You can also type to it at that point. And Siri is actually remarkably good over the years in stuff like basic recognition of voice. It has actually won a lot of like side-by-side competitions, especially at the time when like Bixby was still a thing. And Siri was one of the first ones to have really, really good offline voice understanding, and even commands, like that, of course, going back to even like the iPhone 3GS days, and when they introduced a voice assistant on that on that device. And don't forget that when Siri does things like notes, reminders, calendars, alarms, timers, stopwatches, notes, some Safari stuff, opening apps, any apps, controlling your smart home, playing music, playing a TV show or movie, even finding some kind of file or whatever. That is basically what 95% of usage of voice assistant is all about. So while I know some people want to have Siri sing them in a lullaby in like an anime girl voice, that is not going to be something that Apple ever focuses on. Like Tim Cook, and I assume later somebody maybe like John Turnus and the entire board will just not give them the resources to build like OpenAI competitive like server racks, like that are infinite in size basically and consume an infinite amount of energy, just so they can offer the exact same functionality. I was already surprised at certain offerings by Apple, for example, the fact that they make their own maps. I always wondered why, right? But over time, I saw it went along with their privacy focus. When they introduced Apple Maps, it was significantly faster with its vector-based rendering versus Google Maps at the time. I've seen people be actually dissatisfied with Google, often resting on their laurels. And while Google still offers largely better data than Apple Maps in certain areas, wherever Apple has gone to like specifically map cities and stuff like that, they have actually offered better data, in my opinion, and even better like public transport data than Google. right? Google usually is better at knowing which restaurant has like which opening time. Sometimes there are more mistakes in Apple Maps and things like that. And of course, Google Maps links you directly to Google Search, so you are capable of more easily researching whatever you just looked up on Maps. So I understand that Apple sometimes, even often, does the exact same thing as somebody else, but over time they build it out to be something more unique, right? Siri is actually different in the way that Siri was in many ways actually first as like an on device, it's like, or a built-in voice assistant, having even like an offline functionality. It's just that over time, because Siri stayed focused on basic tasks, people were just like, oh, you know what, Google Assistant is so much better, and even Alexa is so much better, and now of course all those bots are so much better. But the fact of the matter is, the reason why Apple was able to keep Siri as it is without being ashamed is because most people were still pretty happy with the basic functionality of Siri. And yes, they were laughing at Siri whenever they were asking it a more complicated task. And of course, the standard response was, I'm sorry, I cannot help you with that, right? Or could you ask it again? Basically, like the Magic 8 Ball in SpongeBob. But yeah, it's like I find this entire disliking of Siri entirely ahistorical. Like, I know some people have said, "Oh, Apple should have been the first for with actual like this new AI craze because Siri was first." But Apple is, and I always remind you of that, is fundamentally a hardware company. All of their most successful services and all of their most liked tools and apps are things that are built for their hardware, right? Siri was built to make some of those points on their hardware better, but iCloud is not like the greatest cloud storage service ever conceived. But hey, it's integrated into iOS, which runs on iPhone, pretty efficient. Everything else like that. Of course, Apple TV Plus now works on so many other devices, but it works on iPhone by default. Has pretty good HDR capabilities that are balanced with the iPhone's hardware. La di da da da. And the same thing will happen with Siri, where Siri will not just be good in terms of AI, but it will be primarily designed for Apple's hardware, which will mean that a lot of it can run on device. And that will be what Apple will show off. They will talk about the privacy benefits of that. They will talk about the environmental benefits of that not having to relegate data to some kind of super hot running cloud server and stuff like that. So, but yeah, asking for Siri to die like Cortana, that is a point I unfortunately don't understand. Because it's like, yeah, Siri still does what most people want. Just because you suddenly decided you need to ask a task that Apple never advertised, that's kind of up to you. Now, speaking of Apple being a hardware company, my segues are on point today. Let's talk about the iPhone SE 4, because talking about early 2025 announcements like Siri coming in iOS 18.3 or iOS 18.4, seemingly the iPhone SE 4 is very, very likely to be a March release. This actually lines up with historical iPhone SE announcements. I believe two of the models thus far have been announced in March, and one has been announced in April. So every iPhone SE thus far has been an early year release. And we now see more and more confirmation, basically, that this iPhone will be coming with Apple's own designed 5G modem. Now, whether it means it also comes with Apple's Wi-Fi modem, I'm actually not sure. Now, this is coming from Barclay analyst Tom O'Malley. So basically, a lot of what is happening here is most likely just regurgitating points that we have already talked about. But maybe he does have some other sources to confirm some of the other rumors. So he says that they have confirmed that the iPhone SE4 will come with an Apple-designed 5G modem and is slated to launch toward the end of the first quarter, so March or April. In line with previous rumors, the timeframe suggests that the new iPhone SE will be announced in March, just like the current model was announced in March of 2022. Now, all the hardware rumors we have actually talked about in the past, mainly its 6.1-inch OLED display. A lot of people previously asked, well, how will Apple differentiate it from their more expensive devices? Well, now we pretty much know that the iPhone 17 and 17 Air will have LTPO screens, and we even have some rumors that maybe with iPhone 18 Pro, Apple could switch, or 19 Pro at least, could switch to LTPO Plus. So that would put both the regular models and especially the Pros in the tier still above it. I also wouldn't expect this screen to necessarily give you 2000 nits, not because it wouldn't be capable of doing that, but I assume Apple just wouldn't want the battery drain and to have the heating system necessary to ever sustain 2000 nits. So I could see them offering like 1500 or something like that, maybe a peak brightness level that they haven't focused on before. In the past, they've done just these huge jumps from 1000 nits to 2000 nits, and then the Apple Watch offered 3000, so maybe they would offer something in between. Face ID being housed in a notch, that would differentiate it obviously from the Face ID dynamic island system on the iPhone 16 and 17, and then of course especially the 17 Pro Max that is rumored to get a narrower dynamic island than before. A new A series chip, most likely an A18 chip. So maybe I would also argue the A18 is built with 5 GPU cores. So if there are any chips there with like basically one disabled GPU core, I could see it being running. I could see it running like a bint A18 with 4 GPU cores or something like that. Obviously, it would need to have all the A and E capabilities. It would probably get the same 7500 mega transfers per second memory, just so that they wouldn't even have to buy new 6400 mega transfers memory. So that chip would still be very competitive with an A17 Pro. It would probably at this point really lose in GPU performance, but then win in basically everything else. A USB port, strongly assuming it's USB 2 speeds. Maybe at some point Apple gives us maybe 5 gigabits per second on the regular like iPhone 18 models or something like that, while of course the Pros would have like 10 gigabits per second, maybe at some point like 20 gigabits per second, while I assume DSE will just stay USB 2 basically in perpetuity. A single 48 megapixel rear camera, I assume it will probably just borrow basically the exact main camera of the iPhone 16, while that will make it quite capable for like a sub $500 device. I would assume that then a year later or so, it would then just start to lag behind like the iPhone 18 and 19. And of course, it would take another 3 years or so before this model is upgraded. So while it will come with very competitive hardware of the start, it will start to follow behind the rest. It kind of reminds me of a console where when it comes out, it's really, really competitive, even with somewhat higher-end PCs. And while in time, it can maintain its price competitiveness by dropping in price a little bit, or offering better bundles, or offering maybe even more storage. As we saw, like the PS5 jumped from 825 gigabytes of built-in storage to a full terabyte, maybe becoming smaller, lighter, whatever. But it just is dramatically slower than newer PCs, right? That's just the point of keeping the same piece of hardware on the market for years and years. And that's kind of what the iPhone SE does, right? By coming out potentially with for Apple standards, very low profit margin over time, newer hardware comes out, older hardware becomes cheaper. It becomes easier for Apple to just double and triple down on this, and by the time they upgrade it, they wouldn't even have to make a huge redesign. I would just assume that they would use like a notched, like a dynamic island design with even slightly slimmer bezels, but some things I don't think will be changing honestly on the iPhone SE. Like I could see them keeping it a single camera system almost forever, right? Because not everybody needs ultra wides, and Apple honestly has been slacking on the ultra wide, so the quality isn't even that great. You arguably can use like panoramas to get some of that functionality, and the higher quality the main camera gets, the better its zoom gets. So while it will, yes, suck in comparison to 5x cameras or even 10x cameras, well, for optical zoom that will mean that until like 4.9x it delivers the exact same zoom capabilities as like any other iPhone with the same main camera, right? Maybe that would make it a little worse than the Pros, which would have a larger sensor and stuff like that. But overall, it will only start to really suck in comparison by zoom ranges where most people will be like, you know what? Like those 5x zooms and stuff, honestly, these days, they're fun, but 90% of my camera usage is the main camera anyway. So, and especially if I get something for like my kids or my elderly parent or whatever, like, do I really need to make sure that they can take the best 5x telephoto cameras? Do I need to make sure that they have 120 hertz? No, I just need to make sure they have a relatively modern phone that will last them for a while, that will have decent battery life, a nice vibrant screen that is easy to read even outdoors, a nice large screen, so especially if they have poor eyesight, they can actually make the make the icons larger and click appropriately, and stuff like that. And I think that this iPhone will age significantly better than the iPhone SE4. My assumption is Apple could even make it start at $499, even with 64 gigabytes, and then it would be $550 with 128 gigabytes. And honestly, I think it would still sell pretty well. If it is $469 with 64 gigabytes and then like what, 519 for 128, then I think it's actually like a complete steal. And if it's 449 for 64 gigabytes, then I think it will absolutely destroy certain segments of the Android market. But yeah, the part about it here is that beyond just focusing on Apple Intelligence, thanks to like a newer A series chip, 8 gigs of memory, it will also come with Apple's 5G modem. Obviously, Apple's contract with Qualcomm is coming to an end at some point. For now, we do expect the 5G modems, at least in the iPhone 17 Pro series, to be still Qualcomm based. No idea what the iPhone 18 family will be like, but supposedly by 2026, Apple really plans to have more of their Wi-Fi modems, more of their 5G modems across of their devices. Apple did extend its 5G modem supply agreement until 2026. So if they actually want to be fully ready by like 2027, that would obviously mean starting now and then accelerating by some point in 2026. So that will be interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if they prolong this agreement until like 2028 again, just to make sure that if some of their modems have like any shortcomings and stuff like that, they still are basically provided for. But yeah, by 2028, anything that approaches 2030, I just see Apple seeking the same kind of modem independence that they have sought with Apple Silicon for their main processors. Not to say that that means their modems will be that much better in comparison to the rest, in the way that Apple Silicon was versus like contemporary Intel parts or something like that. But it will be cheaper for Apple to make, and it will open up new opportunities for them. They could go crazy and eventually build the modem right into the A series chips, right? Especially the pros, right? Like imagine if, for example, they never plan on making any non-pro iPhone model ever with let's assume the A Pro chips never come to any device again that isn't an iPhone Pro, right? So in that regard, why not build a modem into it? It's already going into devices that will always have modems attached, and then they can use the non-pro Apple chip to be reliant on a separate modem. And then that modem can also go into iPads, which of course feature Wi-Fi and cellular models. So you probably wouldn't want the modem to be right in the A series chip anyway. You would probably want the actual like need to use a different motherboard and antenna solution for the 5G devices. At that point, maybe 6G. At some point, it's rumored that Apple would want to integrate 5G and Wi-Fi and ultra wideband and Bluetooth all into one modem. That would be a very killer separate modem to make. That could be a very good path to making 5G, 6G available on Macs at some point, right? Because if you already have 5G capability on that modem, you might as well build in a few more antennas to make sure that the signal goes through, and then make those devices actually more expensive. Right. So, there's a lot that could be interesting here. We have heard that Apple's Wi-Fi modem will be very, very advanced. So I assume it will be like a full Wi-Fi 7 modem with full 320 megahertz bandwidth capabilities. So I would assume it would double the theoretical download speed from 2400 to 4800 or beyond, versus the current iPhones and iPhone 7 versus the current Wi-Fi 7 chips on the iPhone and the Wi-Fi 6E chips on Macs and iPads. And then I assume Apple would just keep improving from there on. And with 5G, I assume Apple's most notable change here would be to get rid of anything they don't need. Like with Qualcomm, there is like AI bullshit built into the modems for efficiency. If Apple builds those modems really close and really optimized for their A series chips, similar to how they handle storage, where they don't need any NAND controllers on their storage modems, modules, I guess, because all their storage controllers are right on their chips. I assume that that could also happen with that modem, where they just get rid of all silicon that they don't need. I would assume they get rid of any millimeter wave capabilities and stuff like that, any of the AI crap that would be built into a Qualcomm modem, and just say, you know what, we have like a co-processor on the A series chips. Maybe we put in 2 extra efficiency cores to oversee all of it. Maybe we even built a new storage controller that allows data to go really fast up and down between the modem and the actual storage right away. We don't need any of that crap to be built into the modem anyway. So we make it as small as possible. We build it on a relatively new node, maybe not the latest one, but that way we can guarantee TSMC that we get larger shipments than ever, so we can get better exclusivity contracts, better pricing because of mass orders. So a lot to consider here. That's my assumptions here. Unfortunately, we have not gotten too many details on the 5G modem, like what are the targeted speeds? Is it targeting just as many different bands as Qualcomm modems? Might there be regional variants or stuff like that, which I assume would not be the case. But yeah, there's still a lot for us to figure out. According to Min-Chi Kuo, also the iPhone 17 Air would have that Apple designed 5G modem, and people have said that it focuses primarily on efficiency, which of course course, would make sense for an iPhone SE that would have a decent battery size, but not the largest by modern standards. And of course, the iPhone 17 Air that would be very thin, not have the largest battery, obviously, and probably not the best cooling. So the more efficient you can make a separate part like a modem, the better it is. So then there's all the lawsuit garbage in the past, and of course Apple's previous purchase of Intel's smartphone modem business for $1 billion in 2019. So basically, a lot is coming home to roost, and we'll see how it all pans out for the industry. Right now, the iPhone SE 4 is $429. It was $30 more expensive than the previous iPhone SE, primarily because of integrating 5G. And if you don't know, using Qualcomm's modems for Apple comes not just with the cost of buying the modem, but I believe it also comes with some kind of per device payment. And that is why Apple really bumped up their prices whenever they started integrating 5G modems, because every 5G modem that Apple has used thus far has been a Qualcomm modem. And to me, it's just like, I wonder, even with all that price saving that Apple can do, don't forget, it's not a gigantic one, because Apple will still have to pay some like patent. Well, they have a patent sharing agreement with Qualcomm, but I assume that in order to build their own modem, unless they're willing to give Qualcomm access to a lot more patents than I assume they would be willing to, I kind of think they would want to either pay a little more, or just try to test Qualcomm and say, like, you know what, if you think we're still stealing anything from you, come at us through the court, bitches, or something like that. So people are saying it might see at least a slight price increase. My assumption is $499. I could see it having 128 gigabytes at $499, which would actually make it only $20 more expensive. Let us check. I believe it's $479 for the iPhone SE with yeah, it's $479 for the 128 gigabyte model. So if Apple prices the 128 gigabyte model at $499, that honestly is a killer deal, and just gets rid of the 64 gigabyte configuration and then makes 256 gigabyte $599. I honestly think that could work. Maybe they would want a lower starting price. At that point, I could see like $469 being the 64 gigabyte price, and then obviously like $50, $100 more for the higher storage versions. I would prefer a simpler lineup. I think it would also just logistically make more sense. I think with all the other value points, the faster chip, more like the larger screen, the use of their own modem, obviously, even if their own modem might be worse than, like, for example, Qualcomm's like X80 or X85 modem at that point, don't forget, like, I believe this is running on the X55. So at that point, Apple's solution will definitely be a lot better than the old one built in here. So yeah, I think that pricing could work, even if some people really wanted to start somehow still close to $400. I don't see how that would be possible without like some crazy weird compromises on Apple's side. I just don't see that happening. And especially if they want to sell this device for the next 3 years uninterrupted, they probably want to sell it with decent enough hardware, so they don't like, people aren't disappointing if they will buy it a year from now, 18 months from now, 2 years from now. Yeah, people would just say, oh, it's $50 cheaper than it was at launch. My grandma still needs a new phone. Let me buy it. So that's about it for today. I really have heartburn here. So thank you so much for joining. I know that we have been on a little bit of an irregular schedule these last few weeks, so I thank anyone who joins. Let's see if I can come back to a more regularly scheduled program in the next week or so. I'll, of course, let you know. As always, subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it, comment. You see, I love interacting with the live chat. And as always, if you want to support us here directly, or me to be more precise, leave a super chat or sticker. Become a channel member right here on YouTube, or a supporter over on Patreon. But however you seek to support this channel, all is very much appreciated. As always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next, and I'll see you then. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.